And this is there's no expected answer other than observations or thoughts that anyone might have had while you've been reading Ecclesiastes.
It's interesting to me that it's so dark and so light at the same time, because it just turns around, because he is so negative and then so positive. So you see the dark and the light.
Yeah. And we were talking last week after class, and some people have only seen the darkness is so profound initially that some people have been so impacted by that, even to the question, should this be in the Bible? And then they haven't seen the words enjoy. And like I said, there's a discussion on two sides. I haven't handed it out yet, so I'll give you the handout in a second. Thank you. Yeah, and that's what I say. As I read it, then I like that expression. It's kind of like a dialogue within a person. And I mentioned this in another context. Heather, our middle one, has always been very imaginative. And in little communities in Sydney, we have bakeries and butchers and newspaper and on it goes. And we're just standing outside of a bakery, and I'm guessing she's probably 8 or 9. And I'm just eavesdropping. And she's looking, here's this really beautiful cake. And she says, and Satan on this side says, Heather, just make a pig out of yourself and eat all this cake you want to. And then the good angel is saying, Heather, exercise himself. And so she has this discussion between the good angel and the bad angel about this cake in the window. And she's just going, da-da, 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 da-da. And if you know our daughter, that's just da-da, da-da, da-da. But here was this whole conversation with this 8 or 9-year-old girl about one angel's on one shoulder, one angel's on the other shoulder, and she was just verbalizing both of those. But there's a reality that happens to us a lot, in a lot of different contexts. And like, for example, what an amazing passage we've been reading in Corinthians. In Corinth, no temptation has taken you but such as common to man. And in Corinth, God is faithful, and God will provide a way of escape, but we have to look for it. And when I read Ecclesiastes, then it's like you hear these two different conversations, but the darkness and the vanity of vanities and just the futility is so eloquently spoken that for some people they've not heard and seen the other side. Anything else? Okay. We're going to look at chapter 7. And this term, the striving after the wind, is a refrain that has been used over and over. And as you are into chapter 6, this is the last time this expression is used. And again, a metaphor for futility, vanity. Tyler just had a wonderful expression, even using the term smoke, vapor. It's just like a breath, vanity, vanity. And the last time, and it's up through chapter 6, that the term vanity of vanities is used, is there. And as we come into chapter 7, this is going to sound a lot like the book of Proverbs. We're going to start hearing these 2, sometimes 4-line expressions. And the early part, and we just touched on this last week because I wanted to come back and do it tonight. And I don't know the best way to say this, but just from a human point of view, it's just a part of our human nature. We would all prefer to go to a birthday party than to a funeral. I mean, that's just life. But having recognized that, then Solomon is going to say, yes, but through the eyes of wisdom, something happens at a funeral that will never happen at a birthday party. And I'm thinking especially in the life of a faithful Christian. And we're going to hear this wonderful expression, the end of a thing is better than the beginning. And how true is that for a faithful Christian? I still just kind of shake my head when I think about this. And I mentioned it. In 2013, I did 35 funerals. And then the first 12 days of 2014, I did 4 more. So I nearly did 40 funerals in a year. And I told Sheila that's kind of like leaving the lights on your car overnight. And the next morning, the battery kind of goes, that's just, I can't tell you the emotional drainage that goes out. But having said that, the majority of those people are Christians. And so along with that, there is also a sense of, well done, good and faithful servant. And for people who are not Christians who are in the world, they just couldn't imagine, can I use the term, the blessings that can come from the funeral of a godly person? And you've been in one of those situations, you think, yes, this was, I'm glad I came. This was something really, really encouraging. Many of you, if you were here, met Levi Saylor, who was with us as an intern. Levi's in a family of, and it's either 6 or 7 kids, but they had a little sister who they put down at 6 weeks at like 12 o'clock. And when they picked her up at 6 o'clock next morning, she had died in her cot through the night. And this is just burnt in my mind. The coffin is literally this big. And there's no place for a rail. There's places for fingers. Can I say finger holding? You know what I'm trying to say? On either side. And so 4 of their friends are going to carry this precious little girl out. And I happened to be on campus, and those of us that had classes with Stafford North sometimes joked with him about his age. And of course, now we're his age at this time. And Stafford has just taught an awful lot of classes from Daniel and Revelation. And I just said, Brother North, I've done a lot of funerals recently. I haven't done a funeral for a 6-week-old baby. Do you have any suggestions? And boy, I mean, it's just like that. He said, yes. He said, isn't this a wonderful time to talk about heaven? He said, because this child has not sinned, there is absolutely no doubt about where this child is going. And while there's this enormous loss of a baby in the family, he said, what a wonderful time to talk about heaven. And I said, well, you've taught Revelation nearly 50 years. Anything come to mind about heaven? And again, just like that, he said, yes. He said, I think the greatest act of creation since Genesis 1 has yet to take place. He said, you remember when he says, behold, I make all things new? And he said, I think the newness of the new creation is beyond anything that we can comprehend as a human being. And wouldn't it be wonderful to reassure the parents and the siblings that, yes, while they did not get to enjoy watching this child grow up, this child is going to participate in all the things that are new. Maybe within a week or so after that, Sheila's grandmother died at 105. Can I do this? So early in the month, we're at a graveside for a 6-week-old little girl. And when I say, and many, many others if they had even tried to list all of the survivors, it would have taken the whole brochure up. And at a certain point, they very quickly had to say, and many, many others, because just imagine how many great, great, great grandchildren there are if you've lived to be 105. But just from a human point of view, can you see the amazing contrast between 1 week doing a funeral for a 6-week-old baby and then doing one for 105? The last month, Richard, brother-in-law, and his older sister Glenda, went to see Nanny, we called her. She lived just north of the old Shepherd Mall. And she said, I can remember when Shepherd Mall was a cotton field. And they had built out there, and then the rest of the town had developed around them. And this 105-year-old lady with a grandson and a granddaughter visiting quoted to them the 23rd Psalm and urged them to live holy and godly lives for the rest of their lives. Can you imagine the blessing of going to visit a 105-year-old grandmother? And she just had a wonderful spirit. She wasn't on their case or anything. But at 105, she quoted to them the 23rd Psalm and then encouraged them to live holy and godly lives. And when we read these things like, oh, it's better to go to the house of mourning to the house of feasting. The end of a thing is better than the beginning. Those things are especially true for faithful Christians. But someone in the world would never express it that way because they don't have the same paradigm, they don't have the same experience, and they don't have the same hope that we have as Christians. So I use this term in 1-2. We need to look through the lens of wisdom, and this is a part of the enduring value of continuing to read God's Word. But also in this section, there's going to be boundaries on both sides between the wise and the foolish. When you read through Ecclesiastes, the word fool is going to be used 24 times, foolish 3 times. But notice this, the word wise is used 24 times, and the term wisdom is used 28 times. So life is going to be discussed within these boundaries on both sides. Chapter 7:25, I turned my heart to know, to search out, and to seek wisdom, and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And this is true. This is 2:1. Solomon has written about, and this is my term, he's written about the burden that comes with wisdom. In much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases in knowledge increases in sorrow. And there's a measure of truth there. But what we're going to find as we're in the middle of the book, Solomon is going to explain the benefits of wisdom, and he's going to use this 14 times in chapter 7, a contrast to the folly of fools. And for a person of wisdom, some of life's darker moments are better than the pleasures of life enjoyed by a foolish person. And one of the things we talked about last week, do you remember the passage from Isaiah? I make weal and woe. And we did about 4 or 5 different translations. And I still struggle with this because the comment that was made in an Old Testament class, we're quite happy with crediting God with the good things that happen in our life, but we're sometimes reluctant to enable the dark and the bad things that happen to be there as a means to test us. Today was just reading through Psalms, and the early sections just after Psalm 100. And you just come across this expression, God sent Joseph to Egypt. If I'm 17 years old and I'm rotting in prison, I've got a lot of things to work out about my sorry 10 brothers. I mean, here you are in the pride of life. You're 17 years old, and you're stuck in some prison because of your sorry brothers. And I just imagine trying to being Joseph and trying to go to sleep tonight in Egyptian prison, and then you end up with being betrayed by Potiphar's wife, and all this other stuff happens. And at some point, it would be easy just to wave the white flag and say, God, I give up, or to blame God. But what was God doing, even through those darker events that were happening in Joseph's life? He was both equipping him and preparing him to preserve the future of the promise made to Abraham. But Joseph couldn't see that at the time. And last parts of Genesis, it's like you've gone into a tunnel, but you come out. And I'm sorry, I'm fairly forgiving. I'm pretty easygoing. I would give my 10 brothers a lot more grief than Joseph did when they showed up. He kind of messed with them a little bit, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. There would just be this human temptation, here these sorry guys finally are. But what does he say? You meant it for harm, but what? God meant it for good. And you see how important that is? Because we all are going to have things that happen that either don't make sense, that we would prefer it didn't happen that way, and everything from accidents, the list goes on and on. And I've mentioned this over and over and again. People will come to an intersection, and the very event will happen, and some people will turn away from God and will never come back, and other people will use that very same event to draw closer to God. And a lot of that depends if we can allow God to be a part of, can I say, the darker days of our life, and not just restrict him to just only the good things that are going to take place. 2:3, who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. And we're going to read chapter 7, but just a quick note, and we did this earlier. And this is about a third of the Old Testament. The first line, which I call line A, will make a statement, and the second or third line will always interact. There's no sense of trying to rhyme words at the end. It's a rhyming of thought. And so the first line will say something, and then the second line, especially when the word but is used, will be a contrast. It may extend the thought, it may complement the thought, but when you read Hebrew poetry, just always see this interaction taking place through these two lines. So we're in Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. And I'll just stop and say, and some people, you've lost some people already. I mean, how can you say the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth? It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. And we'll come back to that, but isn't this such a totally different perspective than people in the world would have on these kind of events? But let's keep reading. Verse 5, it's better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools, and this is also vanity, and this is our word for vapor and a mere breath. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. We closed with this last week. This is an anchor verse in my life, and I don't always do this, but I think about it a lot. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. Can you think of times you have finally finished something? Kevin, there used to be a parking lot down by Presbyterian Hospital on the north side, and how many stories building is it now? And how long did that take from say planning to opening it up?
Maybe 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. Was there a sense of rejoicing among those who had endured the journey? Yeah, and there's just different things in our lives that happen. I've never been at the top of the class in school. In the third grade, in John Whitehurst Elementary, the third grade was upstairs, and they only did this one time, but one class they called one class the Bluebirds, and my class were called the Redbirds. And by the time we got to recess, the Bluebirds were telling the Redbirds, "Oh, you're the dumb kids, and we're the smart kids in the class." And I'm in the Redbirds. And so all year long we heard da 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 da. And they were, these were really, really bright kids. It's kind of demoralizing all year long for the Bluebirds to rub it into your nose that, oh, you're the dumb kids, you're with the others. I went to a school south of here, surrounded by mesquite trees, and talked to a dean about entering the school, and we talked about 20 minutes, and he just told me, he said, "I can see that you don't have the academic intelligence to complete a program as superiors are, so I would encourage you to help both of us and you not enroll." I said, okay, don't have to put a fleece out, that's pretty clear. We had enrolled in school in Memphis, been there for a month or 6 weeks, and the associate dean calls me in, and he said, "Have you led singing?" "Yes, sir." "Worked with young people?" "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, a church has decided they'd like to get someone part-time. They can't do someone full-time. And get ready. We don't send our really smart students to stuff like this, so I thought of you." And I went home and told Sheila, "We have just received the nicest backhand compliment that you can imagine. We don't send these straight A eggheads who can't talk to somebody." That's not what he wanted to say, but that's how it came out. He said, "We don't send our really smart students to stuff like this. And so I thought of you." So much of life is perspective. So much of life, and this is a part of wisdom, is learning to see things from a perspective other than just initially our own. And I took it that way. I told Sheila that's what I said, and she didn't take the compliment quite as well as I did, but I just told her, I said, what a lovely backhand compliment. We don't send these straight A eggheads to do something like this, and we think you'd be a good choice for this. But that's what he said. We don't send our really smart students, and so I thought of you. Well, that perspective can either cause you to kind of back up and maybe want to quit, or it makes you want to try harder. I tried to enroll in a university in Sydney, and the dean told me, "We're confident that our work here is far superior than what you're accustomed to. So if you'll take 4 classes for a year and pay tuition and not get any credit, we will see if we will allow you into our school or not." So you have 2 really strong reactions, but perspective. And I got to thinking, well, I've been a Redbird all of my life, so what do I have to lose? And the same thing's going to be true with how we deal with adversity. And we'll see some people will have adversity come into their lives, and they'll become either bitter and angry and I'm just clenching my fist and doing this. And then other people will develop a perspective. If I'm patient and stay with God, God can produce good even in something that's very difficult right now. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I have to stay with Him. And that's the type of thing we're looking at in Ecclesiastes, is that the perspective of wisdom about life and struggling and the things that we deal with is always going to be very different than just what the world would say. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud. Do not be quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart or the bosom of fools. And don't say, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask. 11, wisdom is good with an inheritance, and it's an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is the wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. And we're going to come back and think about this. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, and in the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man cannot find out anything that will be after him. And this is what we were talking about last week, about having this holistic perspective. We're all okay with the good things that happen, but what did Job tell his wife? Haven't we received good from the Lord? Shall not we receive evil? And the broader perspective is to have a big enough view of God to allow God to be, and he doesn't tempt us, he doesn't cause sin, that's not what we're talking about. And this is the hard part. Sometimes we and or our families will suffer just because of the sinfulness, the drunkenness, or whatever else of someone else that we had nothing to do with. One of our wonderful, wonderful young men, sophomore coming on junior year at Eastside, was killed just like here's Crossroads Mall, and he had just barely gotten to where the train tracks are. She had been on the wrong side of the road since Tinkerfield. And at 3 trials, the policeman is at the airport. He's driving as fast as his car will go. And just when he comes over the rise after the interstate, she has hit Ryan head on. And, Mom, how would you like to sit there and hear a wonderful man say, I reached through the broken glass and I held him before he died? And the girl that killed him had the emotions of a plastic credit card. Wasn't her fault. On and on it went. And there were 3 trials. Can you imagine being the mother and having 3 3-week trials with someone who just accepts no responsibility at all for killing your son? And this was one of these young men, was never in trouble. He was always at church camp and stuff, always doing the right thing, cheerful, godly. And so how does the family ever put Humpty together again and heal after losing senselessly the life of one of your loved ones because of the sinfulness of someone else? And the challenge is, how can you let God into that tragedy so that you don't end up becoming bitter and angry in the process? Verse 15, in my vain life I have seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Do not be overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It's good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. And we're going to start hearing this fear of the Lord that's going to be the major conclusion of the book at the end. Verse 19, wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in the city. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. Paul, all have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. We're going to hear an echo of that all the way back here. I'm sorry. I'll come back to this in a second. This is so true if you're a teacher in ministry, but it's true of all of us. Do not take to heart all the things that people say. Sorry. I can't tell you the kaleidoscope of things that come to mind when I read just that verse.
Well, that includes the good things too.
And that's going to be very important. Well done. The good things and the bad. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourself have cursed others. All of this I tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. And that which has been far off and deep and very deep, who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death. And there's going to be a discussion about the woman and a discussion about women, and we're going to clarify this before we close, but just get ready. The woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this I found, says the preacher, while adding one more thing to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all those I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. We would all like to know, in relationship to his life, at what point is Ecclesiastes written?
If he figured all this out, why did he let these women drive away?
And perfect comment. If Solomon had, well, and I sometimes wonder, he may have written better than he lived, which is easy to do as well. We've been involved with small kids classes as long as I can remember. And this was not in our class, but this teacher had taught this section, 1 Kings 11, and asked the children to kind of draw a picture. And this little kid raised his hand and said, how do you draw a picture of 700 wives and 300 porcupines?
When I was a little boy, I was always telling my mother Solomon had 700 wives and 300 porcupines.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I used to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Ladies, take this the right way. I just cannot comprehend the madness. I mean, I can't go there. Here's some reflections. Wisdom can make life better. And this first better, a good name is better than precious ointment. Proverbs 21, a good name is to be chosen better than great riches. Everybody's okay with that one. But when you turn the page, laughter can be like medicine. It heals the broken heart. But here's an important comment. This is from Wiersbe. He said, sorrow can be nourishing food, that strengthens the inner person. There is a time to be born and there's a time to die. And oftentimes in my mind, even if I'm just reciting the passage, I think, and God made both of them. And wisdom acknowledges both of them are very much within the plan of God. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to death. Wisdom advises us to look death in the face and learn from it. The day of death is better than the day of birth. It's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. This is the end of all mankind. The living will lay to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness the face of the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So this is a carryover from last week. Wisdom sees the hand of God both in, and how do you describe this? The bright and the dark days of our lives. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other. Another point of wisdom, open rebuke is better than praise. The praise of a fool is just that. And one of the writers I read said this crackling of thorns would be temporary and short heat, but it wouldn't last like logs or other type thing. It would make a lot of noise and initial heat, but it's not a good long-term source of heat. A fool, Proverbs 15:5, a fool despises his father's instructions, but whoever heeds reproof is prudent. A rebuke grows deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows of a fuel, 17:10. 27:5, better is open rebuke than hidden love. The middle part of this section, I just use the expression, take the long view of life. And this is talking about the adverse effects of bribery to get our way. And I just mentioned poor ethics, like bribery, usually comes back to bite you. Anger can result in the short term, but never the long haul. Do not be quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. And this is true of all of us in different ways. Some people are better starters than they are finishers. And just keep reminding yourself, better is the end of a thing than beginning. And I think this is also important, the statement, oh, the former days are better than this. I had a friend in high school that the good old days were the 3 years of high school football, and it was like everything else in life was downhill from that. And as good as those 3 years were, what a waste of the rest of time. And we all know people who've been stuck in something about, oh, the good old days, or something was always better in the past. Longing from the good old days prevents some people from capitalizing on today. It's important for us to be present. Wisdom helps us to see life more clearly. Everything in this life is transitory, and change is the order of the day in all parts of our lives. Wisdom is better than an inheritance. Money and material possessions can be lost, but wisdom is good for today and tomorrow. And this is really important. No one can fully understand the work of God. 7:13, consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he's made crooked? 3:11, everything's beautiful in its time. God has put eternity into men's hearts so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. 11:5. And I think about this, sometimes I look at especially a newborn baby, and I just want to know, where did that spirit come from? Does God just create a spirit every time a baby's born. Um, and I just think here's this combination of spirit and flesh, and it's just an amazing miracle within itself. You do not know the way the spirit comes into the bones in the womb of a woman with child. So you do not know the work of God who makes everything. 11:5. An older song we sang when I was at Oklahoma Christian. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. I don't know the best way to say this, but let me just stumble into it. I think all of us should be able to embrace the mystery and the vastness of the holiness of God. And there's a sense, if I can totally comprehend God, then that's not God. There's always going to be some things about the purposes, the nature, and the work of God that we'll understand. But then I think it'll only be once we get on the other side that we'll fully understand some things that are only partially known on this side. So 2-3 on the back. God balances our lives to give us enough blessings to keep us happy and enough burdens to keep us humble. The week I left Oklahoma Christian, I had graded papers for Hugo McCord for 2 years. He didn't chat a lot, but that way he had to talk with me if I was his grader. And, getting ready to leave school, got everything finished, and Brother McCord comes up and he says, "Young man, I've been praying really fervently that God will send you enough trouble to keep you useful." And my thought was, God, please help this godly man to think of something else to pray about. But what's an older man saying? I'm praying that God will send you enough trouble to keep you useful. And there it is, that perspective of seeing God on both sides. Wisdom helps us face life stronger. There's a moral and a spiritual strength. We need to acknowledge the sin in our lives and deal with it constructively. Some will deny it, some will blame others. Be wise enough not to take to heart other things say about you. To contrast, an older man said, "Son, listen carefully to your critics. They may be telling you something your friends may not be able to tell you." So rather than just discarding something, I try at least, without taking it on board, to listen carefully to critics. The first guy I worked with, a prince of a guy. "Son, when you announce to a congregation that you're going to be leaving, some people will clap and some people will cry." And I add, some people will say, "There is a God in heaven." Yes. And he says, if you can't deal with the fact that some people will clap and some people will cry when you leave, don't ever get into ministry. And what's important is that we first of all seek to serve God, and God is who we serve first of all, and then we work with his people, but we don't work for his people in the same way we work for God. And like the comment, whether it's really things that are good or things that are not so positive at the time. The 12 spies sought to discover things in the promised land. Solomon is going to use all of these faculties to investigate nature. And this last part is a bit dark, but I also stop and think, if you look at Solomon's experience with women in his life, this is a little more understandable. The woman whose heart is snares and nets and hands are fetters. The best part, he who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. When you read the first, especially 9 chapters of Proverbs, the longest discussion is of the tempting woman. And through 50 years of ministry, I have lost more friends from immoral relationships with someone who wasn't their wife than any other single thing. And that temptation just never goes away. So here's kind of the other side, and this is 3:5. Godly women are spoken very highly of in Proverbs. Enjoy wife with your life all the days of your life. God has created us sinless, however, and using a New Testament verse, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, men and women have distorted what God said was very good. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. But look at this. Solomon, in the term in my translation is he held to his 700 ungodly wives and concubines, and in the end, they turned the heart of the wisest man who ever lived away from God. It's a country and western song, but when I think of Solomon and Samson, I keep hearing the refrain of this song, what might have been. The things that are written aforetime are written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. And we listen, first of all, to the words of wisdom, but then we also then try to think, how can I apply those things of wisdom into my own personal life? God bless.
One of the congregations I was in